afternoon to our judges and the team. We now have Team Kris Associates presenting for the International Case Competition auditions. So before we begin, please check that the slide deck displayed is yours and that the clicker is working properly. For the presentation format, you will have 10 minutes to present, and the time cards will be shown when you have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and 1 minute remaining. So once the time is up, I will step in to interrupt and conclude the presentation. Mind you that today's entire presentation and Q&A will also be recorded for further feedback of the team. You may begin when you're ready.
In the span of 23 years, ThaiBev has scaled from being a distillery operator to being a regional F&B powerhouse. However, this very scale and its broader impacts is making the future increasingly complex to navigate for ThaiBev. Good morning, judges. We're Kris Associates, and we're here to help ThaiBev navigate its sustainability issues while growing long-term through two main strategies, that being rewater and low carbon farming. Let's first start by understanding ThaiBev. ThaiBev currently is an operator and producer of widely known beer, spirits, non-alcoholic, and food brands. However, the production of these brands is causing a lot of problems with its water usage and energy usage, and this is particularly bad for ThaiBev due to the rising focus on carbon emissions by regulatory bodies. And this means that an inability to keep up with these regulations would pose, capital and regulatory risks for ThaiBev. And so how can ThaiBev truly navigate these issues? For a business as complex as ThaiBev, we believe a concentrated effort towards a business unit that can drive the most impact would be the ideal way to address this problem. And after assessing all of ThaiBev's business units through their size, carbon emissions, resource consumption, including water and energy, and lastly, feasibility to improve, we believe the beer business unit is a standout business unit to be addressed. Now, taking a closer look at the value chain of the beer business unit itself, we see that we have benchmarked them across emissions, resource consumptions, and existing initiatives of ThaiBev. And we see that downstream is is adequately addressed by ThaiBev. However, there are problems in midstream and upstream. We see that midstream has high scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and also high water and energy consumptions. In terms of energy, ThaiBev has had recent renewables investment which is planned to address the energy problems. However, there is still a lack in terms of addressing their water issues. In terms of upstream, we see that there is high scope 3 emissions coming from their sourcing partners, and they have implemented screening policies. However, there is a inadequate effort to fix their supplier trading programs. And so we will begin by focusing on their water usage problem first. To really address their water usage problems, ThaiBev has two options. First would be to reformulate their core product itself. Second being to adapt their production lines. And we believe that's a standout option because it can really be scaled across ThaiBev's operations. And so we've come up with 4 strategic directions that ThaiBev can take. That includes overhauling production lines, fixing leakages within their production lines, reusing water for production purposes, and lastly, reusing it for energy purposes. And when compared on water reduction potential and difficulty of implementation and operational synergy, we believe that reusing water for production is a standout direction for ThaiBev.
Now that we have a look at ThaiBev key sustainability challenges, first let's have a look at the water inefficiency problem in which our first strategy, rewater, aims to solve. Beer is 90% water. However, producing 1 liter of beer in ThaiBev, they require almost 6 liters of fresh water. If we compare this to our competitors such as Heineken, they only use 2.6 liters of fresh water. And this problem is not because of their irresponsible about their products, but in fact ThaiBev always recheck their water annually and then make sure that it follows the environmental standards. So the problem is not about the resource, it's not about their responsibility, but it's about the inefficiency of their process. And our challenge today is to transform ThaiBev current process into a more sustainable process. Let's have a look at ThaiBev current process, where fresh water comes in and then go through all process and then it's getting discharged out of the process. And within this, out of 100% of water that are being used, 15% are transformed into beer. The remaining 85% are considered wastewater. And within the 85% of wastewater, only 10% are being reused in Thai Wave, with the remaining 90% are discarded back to the environment safely. If we compare this to our competitors such as Heineken and InBev, they have been reusing their wastewater for more than 50%. Externally, Thai Wave are being pressured by the increasing water tariff and drought risk. And to conclude this, Thai Wave current system is not only inefficient in water management, but it also consumes too much cost than it should be incurred. And with that said, our strategy will solve those two problems by categorizing, purifying, and reusing the water. Instead of disposing it back into the environment, first we categorize it into three types: process, cooling, and cleaning water. So that we know that cooling water has the highest potential of reusing, but cleaning water and processed water are not ready to be reused directly. And with that said, we categorize it to avoid over-treating the water and wasting our own resources. And with that said, the remaining cleaning and processed water that are not ready to be reused, and this brings us to our next step, purifying, where we use the two technologies called ABR and reverse osmosis to remove organic matters and remove salts and detergents from processed water and cleaning water, and as a result, we have water that are reusable for boiling, cooling, and cleaning, the process that are untouched to the main products. And lastly, the process of reusing back into the system, circulating the water. This is the current system, and what we're trying to create is a new system where water is circulated around by categorizing and then purify by using the process and then reuse it, so that we can turn the wastewater into a renewable asset instead of being a byproduct. And as a result, this strategy will both reduce costs and also make Thai Wave has a better reputation in sustainability position.
Next, after the rewater strategy has already addressed the midstream production challenges that Thai Wave currently faces, we'll also be focusing on the upstream production process, in which currently the suppliers of Thai Wave contribute to 80% of carbon emission in the value chain. And so we introduce you to the low carbon farm strategy, where we'll personalize training for Thai Wave suppliers and ensure that they strictly follow the ESG regulations. Currently, Thai Wave's raw material value chain consists of three stakeholders: the raw material producers, which then passes the raw materials to the material processors, and the material processors will be connected to Thai Wave through the middleman. However, this poses challenges for Thai Wave through strict quality control, and it lacks transparency in the whole value chain, supply value chain, which prohibits Thai Wave from controlling its GHG and carbon emission. And so we'll be removing the middleman, and we'll form a contractual relationship with the material processors and leveraging them as tier 1 suppliers to ensure that they go through strict intensive trainings and screening processes to ensure that we select the best sub-processors who are ready to follow the ESG process and help Thai Wave reduce their emissions. And through this, we'll also provide them with incentives, such as the ability to display their products in a sustainability expo, which will expose them to more customers, in addition to the monetary incentives that we'll be providing for them. And in our training programs, we'll be dividing the processors into three main categories based on their management skills and their current knowledge of ESG. Then we'll personalize training for each of the categories: brewery processors, star processors, and additive processors, to ensure that they will be able to strictly follow our ESG risk management, raw materials correction techniques, and provide the necessary resources and knowledge to the raw materials producers to ensure that we can minimize emissions in the supply chain value chain.
Okay, thank you for wonderful recommendation. So in order to make this project become successful, it requires 3 years of implementation timeline. So first of all, according to the announcement from Thai Wave, is currently planning for the factory to be created this year. So we're going to take that opportunity and implement the recycling water into its infrastructure. So the construction process is going to take around 1 year. This means that by the beginning of 2027, the factory will be ready to use. And for the low carbon emission program, we can list out of the raw material and also the equipment that can help the farmers to facilitate the that we can gain from our strategy. First of all, we can reduce the freshwater usage, and that will contribute to the cost saved by 400 million Thai baht. And for the second strategy, we can cut down the Scope 3 emission as well as the price on the raw material. Not only that, we can also contribute ThaiBev to achieve SDG goal on climate action, reduce inequality, and responsible for production. And here, we can boost the profit in beer sector and also cut the scope emission by 50%. And here's it how we leverage ESG into core strategy of ThaiBev, ensuring the sustainable growth in the long future. Thank you for your attention, and now the floor is open to any question you may have.
Thank you, team, for your presentation. We will now move on to the 20 minutes Q&A session, where the time cards shown will be 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and 1 minute like usual. When the time is up, you will have 10 seconds to wrap up your final response.
Alright, thank you. First question. With and without your strategies, how will ThaiBev be different?
Or can you repeat the question again?
If ThaiBev implements your strategies versus if they don't implement the strategies, what will be the difference?
So if ThaiBev remains with the status quo, we see that they are going to continue using water the way they currently do, which would incur a lot of water losses. And if they were to implement our strategy, they can reuse the water, and there'll be water savings on one side. On the other side, also with supplier Scope 3 emissions, we see that with our strategy, there'll be reduction in Scope 3 emissions coming from suppliers themselves.
So you're implying that in the status quo, ThaiBev isn't working on wastewater reduction and isn't working on Scope 3 emission reduction?
What I'm implying is that ThaiBev is working on reducing both these aspects, but in different ways. Okay, sure. So for example, for reusing water, the way that they currently dispose water is that the water that's clean and can be used is given away to communities nearby. And we're suggesting reusing that in the production line because we believe that that can drive more value for the business itself. And then in terms of the trading, we see that ThaiBev currently doesn't have, still uses a middleman, and cutting them out is the way to have both cost benefits and more control over their supply chain.
What do you mean using the middleman, cutting them out?
So yes, I'll be happy to take on that question. So the middleman currently, there are the brokers and agents, wholesalers, distributors. They are the third party to ThaiBev's value chain, and we see that because over 80% of emission comes from the supply chain, raw material supply chain. We see it as necessary that we should be leveraging this process, as ThaiBev has already tried to implement a more sustainable and more cleaner way to source their raw materials. So we think that by removing the middleman will ensure that ThaiBev can operate more efficiently while having control over their raw material supply chain as well.
Do you think it's feasible to remove the middleman for such a large company as ThaiBev?
We think that because currently there is an ongoing project that ThaiBev is trying to implement about removing the middleman. We simply want to leverage this project to ensure that they can truly foster relationships and truly connect with the suppliers in the upstream process.
How is it related to reducing Scope 3 emissions?
Yes.
The emissions are still there.
Yes.
It's more like a profit improving strategy.
Okay. So because we want to ensure that, so we realize that the main problem that currently suppliers are still producing a lot of emissions is because they don't have the necessary resources, they don't have the necessary skills and knowledge, but they are obviously trying to earn a living as well. So by providing a more highly incentivized program for them, by providing necessary resources and skills, they will be able to further leverage their skills in terms of producing high quality raw materials, and in addition, they will also be able to sell their products at the same time.
No, you're not answering my question. I'm saying that the strategy to remove the middleman, if you go to your backup slide, you were looking at the profit margin as middleman takes, blah, blah, blah. If you take that out, ThaiBev gets more profit margin. So my sense here is that it's more profit-driven strategy. It has nothing directly to do with reducing Scope 3 emissions. But then you're saying that you're providing training for these, players in the supply chain to reduce Scope 3 emissions. So I don't see the link. How is it related to removing the middleman?
Sure. Just a point of clarification. So by removing the middleman, we can, train and teach the suppliers about the various ESG standards that we want them to follow. And if they were to follow those standards, we will continue buying from them. And that's how we reduce Scope 3 emissions while also improving our profit margins.
Just curious, how is it really different from what they're trying